You're listening to Backstage Access, where we sit down with the artists behind the music, talking life, faith, and behind-the-scenes conversations. Real people, real stories. Let's head on backstage. Thank you for joining us on Backstage Access. This week, we have David, a.k.a. the lead bassist. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to let us get to know you a little bit, let our listeners get to know you a little bit. We're really grateful for you to be on here.
Hey, I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
So if you don't mind, just share with us and our listeners a little bit about you, you're coming to Christ and then kind of how that transitioned into a music career.
Sure. So I'm a church kid through and through. I grew up in a very active church, and as I got older, honestly, I spent more time in church than at home, as my parents would testify. But backtracking a little bit, I started musically when I was a little bit younger. I'd say probably about 10 or 11. I started playing percussion for a local private school.
Okay.
And I did that for several years. And, my mom always encouraged me, oh, you should try the guitar, and, brushed her off because percussion was my thing. I loved it. But after about 5 years of that, I got a little bit bored, and I took her up on her offer to play guitar. So she went out and found me an amazing teacher at a different local, smaller church. And I did lessons with that teacher for a few months before I decided to try out for the church worship team. And it didn't go well. I remember after the audition, the worship leader pulled me aside and he said, we're not saying no, we're just saying not yet. But the kids ministry could use some help. So I had auditioned for the high school ministry, and they told me, not yet, but they sent me down to the kids ministry to help. They framed it as to help, but in reality, it was to kind of get those skills that I needed to kind of build up a stage presence and a little bit more confidence, and to learn my instrument a little bit better. So those two facets of my life were very intertwined, church and music. But as the years went on, as I got older, I started to kind of just go through the motions. And, it wasn't, it was more about making sure that I was put together, making sure that I was playing the notes right, the songs correctly, than it was about worship. And eventually that kind of caught up to me. It was something that was tugging on me for a while, but eventually it caught up to me, and I had a moment where I was actually asked to step down from my position as a worship leader. So I did. I stepped down and took a few years off, and there was a lot going on in my life at the time. So took a while off, and in the meantime, got married, moved away to the other side of the country. Didn't really find a good church for the first, not to say there aren't good churches where I'm at. It's just, I wasn't looking very hard is what I should phrase it as. Wasn't looking very hard to find a good church, and kind of just still going through the motions, and basically had a moment where trying to put out my own music and trying to make things work, that God kind of put it on my heart that, you need to go back to the basics. You need to go back to honoring me with these gifts that I've given you. It's not about you trying to make things work. It's about you honoring me, and I will open the right doors for you when the time is right. And this kind of message that I got, well, it kind of came at a time of really a real spiritual low. So I made it a mission to not only rededicate using my gifts to give back to the God that gave me those gifts, but also rededicate my life and my heart to God, because I had just been going through the motions for far too long. And even though as a high schooler, my faith was very strong, all it took was one real taste of what adult life can be like, and everything kind of crumpled apart. And it took many years for me to kind of put the pieces back together and to decide enough is enough. So that's where I'm at now. I'm actually I'm getting back into a worship team at the church that I've been attending with my wife, and we're my vision is a lot less focused on numbers and trends, and just my heart and how can I use these gifts to point back to the one who gave them to me.
Yeah, that's good. I think, you're talking about being a worship leader, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't really understand. A worship leader is so much more than just somebody who is musically talented or musically gifted. You're really setting the tone for the worship experience for the congregation. You're getting them ready, and you're ushering in the Holy Spirit. And that is something that you really need to be prepared for. That's not something that you can just do on the fly. You have to be very, very intentional. And I think that that's something that a lot of people miss. So you said that you had been in church since you were a child and you were a worship leader, but what inspired you to have the sound that you currently do?
Yeah. So I've always been into rock music. Basically around the same time that I learned how to play guitar is when I started getting into bands like Skillet and Red and Thousand Foot Crutch and a lot of those those Christian rock bands. Around that, what would that have been? That would have been the 2010s, around that time. I loved it. I fell in love with it, and very quickly went from listening to rock to listening to metal. I discovered Wolves at the Gate when they put out their We Are the Ones EP, if that's what it's called, if I remember correctly. And progressed into, bands like Demon Hunter and Living Sacrifice and Becoming the Archetype. And so all these bands kind of just mixed together to sort of create, to create the sound of, the lead bassist that you hear, today. But, I can't really say that there was a moment where I made a conscious choice to go from worship to rock. I always wanted to do rock, but it was the worship ministry that was readily available to me at the time. Gotcha. So as I got older and as I got, income, and I was able to buy recording equipment and buy more guitars and stuff, that's, when I started to really kind of tap into this rock sound that I've always wanted to do.
Gotcha. Okay. And so as a Christian rock artist, we've had so many rock bands on this podcast and lead singers, and a lot of them have talked about kind of the challenge that comes from being a Christian rock singer, because you have a little bit of, I don't want to say judgment, maybe a little bit of judgment, but you have the issues from the church, it's too heavy, it's too loud, it's not your traditional style of worship. Then you also have like a lot of like the secular venues and secular clubs that say, yeah, we don't, your lyrics are too Christian. So we're not really interested. And so it seems like a lot of the artists really struggled in the early stages because of that. Was that something that you experienced as well?
Yeah, to a degree. Not so much with different venues and stuff, but definitely from within the church. There were, a lot of takes on on rock music, and for a while, I would even get into it with my mom about it for years and years. So we would kind of go back and forth, and she let me have rock and all of that, but the deal was I don't want to hear it, so listen to it in your room, and you can listen to it in the car if it's not all that really heavy screamo stuff that I know you like listening to. So there were compromises, and I think over time maybe some desensitization with my parents, but yeah, I mean, I remember even kids my age, just listening to a band like Skillet, even kids my age would make fun of me for it. And I kind of just laugh it off because whatever. But yeah, there was definitely a little bit of that stigma. But I think I've been fortunate enough to grow up in a time where we're kind of close to the majority of that, where a lot of Christian rock and Christian metal has not only found its place in the mainstream and been accepted by a lot more of the, I would say, old-fashioned Christian culture, but not only being accepted, but firmly cementing its place, I would say.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely not the same now that it was, 20 years ago, or even, I would say, honestly, probably even 10 years ago. Definitely seems like there's more openness as far as what worship can look like, what Christian music is. And I think I feel like we're starting to see a lot more people interested in scripture, interested in knowing who Jesus is. And I think because of that, that rock sound, I think there's people who maybe traditionally wouldn't have wanted any part of church, wouldn't have stepped foot in church. That music, I believe they kind of gravitate to. I was one of those that when I made the decision to rededicate my life to Christ and I got rid of secular music, it was such a struggle because growing up, I was into like Korn and Papa Roach and 3 Days Grace and like all these really heavy bands. And so I didn't know the extent of Christian rock music. And so when I made the decision to only listen to Christian music, to go from that to, Mercy Me and Jeremy Camp and Chris Tomlin, it was just a transition that I could not make. I did not enjoy it. I couldn't get into it. But when I discovered, the very first Christian band I discovered was Seventh-day Slumber. And I fell in love with their music. And then I was introduced to Skillet and Thousand Foot Crutch and Fireflight. And I started hearing all these heavier bands, and I loved it. And it was honestly through that now I have a deep love and appreciation for worship music like Chris Tomlin, like Jeremy Camp, because now as God has worked in my life and has opened my heart and my eyes to see that there are so many different ways to worship, there's not one cookie cutter way, then it allows me to have an appreciation for so many different kinds of music. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing now, is that people are being more exposed to Christian rock music and enjoying it. Same thing, Christian hip hop, just these genres that weren't necessarily welcomed in, like you said, like the Christian culture, but now are being welcomed and people are hearing it more. And I really think it's creating this excitement for people who, maybe church was not all that exciting for them before. And they're curious, like, I like this sound. What is this about? And through that music, they're being slowly introduced into a relationship with Christ, or at least starting to develop that hunger, and that maybe not hunger necessarily off the bat, but like that interest, that uniqueness, and what is this about? And I love it, and I see it like the events that we put on. You can see it, just those people that are hungry for that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, look at I think one organization that definitely played a good part in that. Look at Winter Jam. I mean, you've got Winter Jam. It's mostly your worship artists, but I remember going and seeing Red at Winter Jam, and I remember seeing Thousand Foot Crutch at Winter Jam, and I remember discovering new bands that I would never have heard of otherwise at Winter Jam. I've always enjoyed Winter Jam. I don't go to it much these days, but I think that's a great example of kind of trying to break down those boundaries and try to kind of marry those, your traditional worship with really what is becoming, I don't want to say modern worship, but it's like you said, there's so many different facets of worship, kind of trying to marry all of those together.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We actually just went to Winter Jam last week, and and even Russ, the lead singer of New Song, who puts on the whole thing, even he said, it's very rare that you get to come to an event and hear Disciple and then hear Chris Tomlin. It just doesn't happen very often. But I think one, it is a great thing because it has, people who are more into rock. They can come and they can have an experience. They can also be introduced to very powerful worship through like Matthew West and Chris Tomlin. Mm-hmm. You also have people who maybe grew up in the church culture that said, this is what Christian music is. It looks like this, that, kind of your more just kind of CCM type music. And those people then hear Disciple, and may have been scared at first, but you get to see the lyrics on the screen. You get to hear Kevin's talking in between songs, and it kind of really exposes those people as well to a new side of Christian music and worship, and what that can be and what that can look like. And so I really do think it's a great thing, again, from a music lover's perspective, but again, just introducing different cultures and different music styles for everyone to enjoy.
Absolutely. I agree.
So I'm curious, I know you had said that, you faced a little bit of that adversity, being a Christian rock artist. And so during those times, which you don't even really have to be a Christian rock artist, I would say any artist in general, you have those moments, those struggles where it's like, is it worth it? Am I making a difference? And you just kind of maybe get a little bit discouraged. And I'm curious, like, if those times have ever happened to you, what was it that kept you motivated, that kept you just focused to say, regardless of what's going on around me or how I'm feeling, I know this is a calling and I'm going to continue to pursue it?
Well, first and foremost, I think just knowing that it is a calling and that I have a duty to answer that calling, whether I want to or not, I think is the first and foremost, most important. But one thing that I have been really hanging on to over the years is it's not about me.
Mm.
right? Like, and I obviously write and I record music that in the same style of other artists that I enjoy, and I do enjoy what I do, but it's not about me.
Mm.
It's about it first and foremost. To go back to my first point, it's about answering the calling that God gave me, but also it's about that one person who may be one out of a million who needs to hear the words that God has given me to say. That's who it's about. It's not about what does David want. It's not about how can I climb to the top of the Billboard charts. It's about what is my message and what do I have to say to that one person who may be that one out of a million who has never heard Christ before. And if that person is the only person that I affect in my entire career, then I will have considered that a great success and a great victory.
Oh, absolutely. When did the Lead Bassist project officially start?
Oh my goodness. Wow. That would be officially, I want to say 2020, 2019 maybe. And if you look at my discography, you'll see I didn't put out any music for a long time. But I definitely created I didn't create it. There's a story behind that, but the idea of the Lead Bassist came into being, I would say probably about 2020. And I had already been writing music and stuff like that, but I was going to release it under a different name. But the name Lead Bassist actually came from a joke with one of the worship teams that I was serving on. I was the only bassist in the church that I was serving in at all. And there were rumblings about another bassist joining the team after a couple of years. Finally, another bassist joining the team. And one of the worship team members had offhandedly joked about, oh, now we have a rhythm bassist and a lead bassist. And I took that and I ran with it.
Okay. When I asked you when the project started, I don't know why, but something in me said that you were going to say around 2020, because it just seems that so many artists we talk to, that they say that they started around that same time. And I'm like, that is the worst time to try to start a band and get into live music when the whole world is shut down and nobody can do anything.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I actually, the Lead Bassist is the first time that I've really taken music. I don't want to say seriously, but like the first time that I've actually put out music as a published artist. But I've actually been writing music since I was a teenager, since I was 13, 14. So I had a lot of writing experience. And I started a band in high school, and we never met for a single practice, and we never recorded a single song. But technically, I had a band, and it was me and a group of my friends, and we never actually did anything.
So, I know you had talked, about the worship, being the worship leader. But I wanted to ask, what was it that shifted to make you think that music was no longer a hobby and it was now a ministry, a calling that had been placed in your life?
That's a good question. I think a big part of it was listening to a lot of Skillet and watching live concerts and hearing the way that John reaches at his concerts and the way that he takes his time out of playing a show to make sure that people know, who the band is, what they're about, and more importantly, who they're about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the first time in my brain that a light switched on, and I thought, okay, so this is like church kind of. But then as the years went on, actually, focusing less on the sound of music and focusing more on the message of music, listening to bands like Disciple, who I have a Horseshoes and Hand Grenades CD that actually has in the lyric booklet, I believe, Bible verse references.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing that, like, okay, so these guys they're writing music based on the Bible. And then you look at bands like Wolves at the Gate, where some of their lyrics are just Bible verses. And it's like, okay, so there is a whole other world here. It's not just Sunday school. This is a light in what is traditionally known as a very dark place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Kevin, I've seen Disciple at least 16 times. And in my opinion, Kevin is one of the most amazing speakers that I've heard. So I'll kind of ask a deeper question. I know you said you haven't done shows, but you've recorded 3 albums. And so what do you want people to feel when they listen to your music?
So that depends on what they're listening to. So I'll go into a little bit about what exactly it is that I write. So I write an album, which typically I'm planning on releasing, once every 2 years. And in the interim, I like to produce singles, just one-off. It gives me a chance to experiment and all that. But the albums themselves are concept records, and they're all tied into each other. And it's kind of a very like C.S. Lewis inspired fantasy type story that's being told, but with spiritual, undertones and spiritual themes and stuff like that. So, when you're listening to songs on the album, I hope that people are picking up on the story that's being told. But when you're listening to I call them the non-canon singles, because the singles that I put out in between album years are kind of just me getting a chance to be myself and experiment a little bit and do whatever. But those songs all have their own messages, hopefully kind of a little bit more clearly defined, especially the singles that are coming this year. But regardless of what it is that people are listening to, I hope that they hear hope and that they hear determination and perseverance, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is a silver lining, and there is a God who loves them. Not every song that I write is necessarily a worship song, but I strive in everything that I do to kind of capture that core, that there's a God who loves you, there is hope no matter what it is that you're going through, and that's whether you're listening to one of my non-canon singles or you're listening to part of what I'm referring to as the Andromeda story that I'm kind of writing and weaving together through these albums.
Okay, all right, and so you kind of hit on it with kind of the purpose behind your music, but leaving music aside, like not necessarily specifically with music, but we get people that listen in on this podcast that are not Christian, that maybe they just came across it, maybe somebody had sent them a link. And so for anybody that's listening right now, using your experiences and obviously your relationship with God, what would you say to someone to speak life and encouragement into a person that's listening?
I would say, first of all, I would reiterate that there is a God who loves you, and he sees where you're at and what it is that you struggle with. He knows you better than you know yourself. He created you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. I would highly encourage, especially for those who have given church a chance and maybe it didn't work out, or for those who have been a Christian and maybe they're starting to fall off, or maybe they're their faith is waning, to keep going, to find that perseverance and that determination within you to pursue that relationship with Christ, because he's always there. He's always watching. He's always listening.
Amen. Thank you for that. So David, I really, really appreciate you jumping on the podcast with us and giving us your time. I did want to give an opportunity real quick to let our listeners know, where can people go to follow you, to stay up to date with what you're working on, and also to find your music.
Sure. So music, I'm basically everywhere. I am partnered with a distributor who is on basically every streaming platform you can think of, and a ton that you have probably never even heard of. It's incredible. But obviously Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube Music, all of the usuals. You can find me on mostly Instagram. I do have a Facebook page, but it's not very active. But you can find me on Instagram at TheLeadBassist, one word, no punctuations. And stay tuned. Later this year, there will be an official website launch.
Awesome. Okay. Well, David, like I said, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you joining me on here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
You too. God bless you.